The Princess and the Pea, especially for Lee. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, there lived a handsome prince. He had loving parents, plenty of friends, and lived a wonderful life in his castle. But one thing made him sad. He did not have a wife. The prince had always wanted to marry a princess, but he wanted her to be clever and funny and loving and kind. None of the princesses that he met at parties and balls were quite right. Some of the princesses were too mean, some were too rude, some went too quiet, and some were too loud, and some were just plain boring. So the prince decided to travel the world in the hope of finding a perfect princess. He met many more princesses who tried to impress him with their beauty, their dancing and their baking, but still none were quite right. I'm never going to meet the right princess, he sighed to himself. Oh, where is that girl of my dreams? Months passed without success, so eventually the prince headed back to his castle. Cheer up, my son, said the king. You are still young. One day you will meet a wonderful girl, just like I met your mother. The king smiled at the queen, but he was at a loss to know how to make the prince happy again. Then one night, when even the king and the queen had begun to give up hope of their son ever finding a bride, there was a terrible storm. Thunder roared, lightning flashed, and the rain poured down. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the wooden castle door. I wonder who could be out on such a terrible stormy night, said the prince. When he opened the door, a pretty young girl stared back at him. She was soaked from head to toe. Oh, please, your Royal Highness, may I come in for a moment, she pleaded. I was travelling to see some friends, but I got lost in this storm, and now I am very cold and very wet. The prince ushered the poor girl in out of the wind and the rain. You poor thing, said the queen, you must stay the night. You cannot travel on in this weather. The prince smiled at the girl. What is your name? He asked her. I'm Princess Penelope, she replied. You are all very kind. I don't want to bother you. At the word princess, the queen smiled to herself. I wonder, she thought, but she didn't say anything. She took the girl's hand and said aloud, Of course not, my dear. Come and let's get you warm. Once the princess had changed into some dry clothes, the queen invited her to have some supper with the family. The prince listened contentedly as the charming princess chatted away over their meal. He could not stop gazing at her. She was clever and funny and loving and kind. By the end of the evening, the prince had fallen in love. The queen was delighted when she saw what was happening, but she wanted to be quite sure that the Princess Penelope was a real princess. She went to the guest room in the castle and placed a tiny pea under the mattress. Then she told the servants to pile 20 more mattresses onto the bed. Then the queen had 20 feather quilts piled on top of the 20 mattresses. Now we shall see if you are a real princess, murmured the queen to herself. The queen showed the princess to her room and tucked her into the towering bed. Sleep well, my dear, she said. In the morning, the princess came down to breakfast, rubbing her eyes. How did you sleep, my dear? The queen asked. The princess didn't want to be rude, but she couldn't lie. I'm afraid I hardly slept a wink, she replied, stifling a yawn. I'm so sorry, my dear, said the queen. Was the bed not comfortable? There were so many lovely mattresses and quilts. It should have been very comfortable, replied the princess. But I could feel something lumpy and bumpy, and now I am black and blue all over. The queen grinned and hugged the little girl to herself. That proves it, cried the queen. Only a real princess will be able to feel a tiny pea through 20 mattresses and 20 feather quilts. The prince was filled with joy. He had finally met the princess of his dreams. Not long after that, the prince asked Princess Penelope to be his wife. She happily agreed, and they were married in the castle. The prince was never unhappy again, and as for the pea, it was put in the Royal Museum as proof that perfect princesses do exist. The end.